Welcome back. In this second part of my interview with Peter, I asked him how he sees the American economy recovering, even with the Fed stepping away, given that we've been on life support for so long. So what do you see as the end game here, or the strategy for the Federal Reserve? Because normally, if we compare this, we've heard a lot of comparisons. One is that the economy went into effectively intensive care after the 2008 financial crisis. And if you're in ICU as a patient, the eventual goal of the doctors is to get you out of ICU and to get you home. But the way that the Fed is approaching this, it just kind of seems like this is zero interest rate policies for the indefinite future is essentially like being on a dripper for an indefinite period of time. How do you think the Fed is going to eventually try to take their hands off? And can they even take their hands off?
It's actually worse. It's like we're in intensive care, and what the Fed is doing is simply guaranteeing that the disease that is afflicting us is going to kill us. The 0% interest rates prevents the only thing that might cure us. We need higher interest rates. We need to allow the economy to restructure and rebalance. We need more savings. We need lower real estate prices. We need to have a solvent financial system. We need to balance the books. We need less government spending. We need to get rid of these trade deficits. We need some surpluses. We need some production. None of this is going to happen with 0% interest rates. All we're going to get is more speculation, more debt, more consumption, more air in the bubble, which means a lot more air comes out when it bursts. You know, if you think that Europe is going through a problem right now, you ain't seen nothing yet. I mean, Europe is the warm-up. America is the main event. We are where the real sovereign debt crisis, currency crisis is going to develop, and it is going to be enormous because of what the government has been doing. You know, it was going to happen anyway because of the mistakes that the government made in the past, but because they continue to compound those mistakes in the present, it's going to be that much worse when it happens.
All right, so I agree with you regarding interest rates. This has to happen eventually. There's no way you can run an economy off of infinite credit forever. But every time, that was part of the Great Moderation, right? Every time we had a recession, the Fed would meet it with easing, and that was the idea. The idea is you could smooth out the business cycle. And that's created a mountain of debt over a prolonged period of time. And that mountain of debt has also contributed, in real terms, to structural changes in the economy. And those changes, manufacturing jobs, everything else, can't just come back overnight. So what kind of depression are we really looking at here? And at the end of the day, if the Fed eventually, whether it takes its hands off or not, eventually there's going to have to be a readjustment. But are we so far down that road that the government is eventually going to step in a much more forceful way, and we're not going to return to a free market economy? I mean, is that pretty much gone in your view?
Well, we haven't had a free market economy in a long time, and we keep getting less and less free as the government continues to up the ante on its intervention. And the problem is, the more the government gets involved in the economy, the more they screw it up. And the more they screw it up, the more they get involved to try to solve the problems that they blame on the free market, but are actually a consequence of a lack of a free market and a direct byproduct of government policy and government intervention. But in answer to your question, we're going to have an inflationary depression. I think that's the worst kind. It's going to be worse than what we had during the 1930s. And every day the government only ensures that that depression is going to be that much deeper and last that much longer. And unfortunately, everything that the government is likely to do as the depression unfolds is going to exacerbate it and lengthen it. I mean, so we're not even close to having an understanding in Washington of what's causing the problem. And until we understand that, we're never going to solve it. We have to understand that the cure, the stimulus that the politicians always reach for, is the reason we're so sick. And the more they stimulate the economy, the sicker it's going to get.
So going back to my point, though, so we're really sick, right? And we were really sick during the Great Depression, and one of the outcomes of that was more government, and eventually there was World War II. Is there any way that we're going to be able to avoid some sort of this going from an economic crisis to a political crisis?
Well, I hope so. I mean, first of all, we're a lot sicker than we were in the 1930s, and unfortunately, the cure is nowhere in sight as far as being able to adopt it. We know what the cure is. It's just that we can't get the politicians to allow the economy to swallow it. But as far as the politics, I mean, we're going to go through something very traumatic as a nation, and it is a climate where real tyranny can flourish. I mean, look what happened in Germany, in the Weimar Republic, in the aftermath of that hyperinflation. We ended up with the Nazi Party coming to power. I mean, so when you have the type of environment that we're going to have, I think you're going to have civil unrest. I think people are going to be rioting because things are going to get bad in this country. And the more the government gets involved with stimulus, and I think ultimately we can have price controls, because the government is now denying that there's any inflation, even as they go on creating it and creating it. But eventually, gas prices will be so high, food prices will be so high that there will be a lot of calls to do something about it. And rather than turning off the printing presses and raising interest rates, I think they're going to look to control prices, and that's just going to create shortages and compound these problems. And it's going to be a very, very dangerous environment for civil liberties. And who knows, you know, the government's going to get bigger and bigger and looking to consolidate its power, maybe silence the voices of people who are pointing out the problems. You know, they've already got it all set up now with terrorists. You know, they've got a lot of power now because of the war on terror. Well, they can describe or classify anyone they want as a terrorist and now throw them in jail and lock away the key. So people who are trying to point out what the government is doing wrong on a monetary basis or as a fiscal basis, I mean, who knows? They could be characterized as terrorists. People who are using the black markets, people who are buying food or energy illegally might be considered terrorists. Who knows? But there is a lot of risk out there. I hope it doesn't play out that way. I hope that we can learn a lesson from this and understand that it is the government that has caused these problems. I mean, look at all the support that Ron Paul enjoys among younger Americans. They're hearing the message. They understand that it's the government, that it's the Federal Reserve. And so if we can spread that message and that understanding, and we can have a renaissance, a revolution of freedom and liberty, then maybe we can use the crisis to our advantage, to roll back government and to re-embrace our roots. So there is also the opportunity that we can make a positive situation come from this. But, you know, we don't know yet. I mean, history isn't closed. We still have to wait and see how it plays out.
Well, I mean, I guess I'm not that hopeful. But speaking of government and government's role, we had the State of the Union last night, and I heard a lot of the same sort of things we've heard before. Obama talked about mortgage refinancing. He talked about student loans. One of the things I find really interesting is every time we have our standard of living has deteriorated over the course of many years, and one of the reasons for that is that prices have gone out of whack with people's incomes and wages. And every time we have price increases, it seems that the financial sector, in conjunction with the government, want to come in and provide cheaper loans in order to enable people to buy and spend things that are out of reach instead of letting price adjust. So it creates debt accumulation. Now, one of Obama's latest plans is this mortgage refinancing. What is your take on that? Because it looks to me like all they're really doing is giving, you know, lower rates to people that already can't afford their mortgage, not allowing price to adjust, and at the same time taking the liability and moving onto the government balance sheet away from private institutions.
Yeah, this is more of a bailout where we're taking underwater mortgages